Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Billi FitzSimons.
I'm Emily Donohoe.
Hearings have begun in the first case of its kind at the International Court of Justice. West African country the Gambia has brought a case against Myanmar for alleged acts of genocide against the Rohingya people. When legal proceedings were launched in 2019, it was the first time an alleged genocide had been submitted to the ICJ by a country not directly affected by the genocide. The verdict of the unprecedented case could influence future cases, like the pending trial against Israel, brought by South Africa, for alleged acts of genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. Today, we're going to explain everything you need to know about the ICJ case against Myanmar. Emily, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
This is a huge and complex story. Before we get into the legal proceedings, for anyone who's not super familiar with Myanmar, do you want to just kind of set the scene, tell us a bit more about the country?
Of course. So Myanmar, which was also known as Burma until 1989, is actually the largest country by area in mainland Southeast Asia. In the 1960s, there was a military coup that put the country under totalitarian control for decades. This looked like violent crackdowns against anti-government protesters and mass killings. The country has faced further political turmoil since another significant military coup in February 2021, when the armed forces seized power from the democratically elected government.
I was going to say, I remember that military coup in 2021 so clearly. That was absolutely massive news when it happened, and the country is still dealing with the aftermath of that coup, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we know there has been civil unrest in the region for a while now. Where do the genocide allegations come into this?
Yeah, sure. So a Muslim ethnic minority called the Rohingya have lived in Myanmar for generations, particularly in the Rakhine state. Since the 1980s, so during that time of unrest, they have been denied Myanmar citizenship. And in 2016, a Rohingya militant group called the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, which I'll just refer to as ARSA, attacked police in the Rakhine on multiple occasions. And following that, a UN report states that the Myanmar army forced Rohingya out of the area, killing them and burning their villages. And it only escalated from there. In August 2017, when a Myanmar army battalion was sent to the Rakhine, the ARSA attacked police and army officers, killing 12. In response, Myanmar's army burned Rohingya villages and killed thousands of civilians. Human rights groups also reported Rohingya women and girls were raped and sexually assaulted by the military.
Just absolutely horrific details. How did the Rohingya people respond?
Around 700,000 Rohingya fled to Myanmar's western border to Bangladesh, where around 300,000 Rohingya people who had previously fled Myanmar were in refuge. Cox's Bazar in southern Bangladesh is a city housing the world's largest refugee camp, and to date, more than 1 million Rohingya live there. Humanitarian groups have reported a lack of access to necessities like clean water, toilets, education, shelter, food, and space.
So essentially they responded, those who survived, by fleeing the country.
By leaving.
And so we're talking about it today because this case is now before the International Court of Justice. What do we need to know about the International Court of Justice?
Sure. So the ICJ has also been called the World Court, and it's the UN's top court. It rules on disputes between states, including on issues like this, genocide. In 2019, the Gambia submitted a case to the ICJ accusing Myanmar of genocidal acts against Rohingya, and this references that 2017 crackdown.
Okay, and so this is where that term genocide comes in. How does the ICJ define genocide?
Sure. So the UN have something called the Genocide Convention, or that's the shorter name at least, and it explicitly defines genocide as, quote, acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, national, ethnical, racial or religious groups. Both Myanmar and the Gambia are signatories to that convention.
Okay, and you said earlier that this case is the first of its kind, but the ICJ has ruled on genocide cases before. So how is this the first of its kind?
Sure. So in the past, ICJ cases about genocide have been brought forward by a country alleging that the other has committed the act of genocide against them. So a good example is the last ICJ case about genocide, which was in 2007. And the ICJ ruled that Serbia committed a genocide in a town in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1995. So that case was brought against Serbia by Bosnia and Herzegovina. But when the Gambia took action in 2019, it was the first time an alleged genocide had been submitted by a country not directly affected by the accused.
And I think it's worth mentioning that there's also now, since the Gambia launched this, South Africa has now done a similar thing with Israel, right?
Hi there, my name's Emma. I'm the editor at the Daily Aus, just popping in to say hi and let you know that here at the Daily Aus, we are an independent media company who work to break down the news for young Aussies in a digestible and accessible way. If you like what you're watching and you like what we do, please hit the subscribe button. Now back to the video.
Yes, that's true. So South Africa has made a similar move to the Gambia, and in 2023 it put forward an alleged genocide case against Israel, despite not being directly impacted by the accusations. And those accusations are that Israel has committed a genocide against the Palestinian people and failed in its obligation to prevent a genocide in Gaza, as specified under the Genocide Convention, which those two countries are also signatories of.
Right, but the reason why Myanmar is the first one is because it's the first one that's going to trial, which is why we're talking about it today.
That's right. So this one is an active trial, whereas the Israel case is pending.
Okay, and so we're focusing on the Myanmar one today because, like we said, that's the one that currently is at trial.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us more about that case.
Sure. So the trial began last Monday at the ICJ, and that's based in the Dutch city of The Hague. The Gambia alleges, quote, Myanmar acted with the intention to destroy the Rohingya as a group, in whole or in part, very much along the lines of that convention that I read earlier. Among the evidence the Gambia references is a previous report that the UN did about Myanmar's actions towards the Rohingya people, and that report alleges that Myanmar is, quote, failing in its obligation to prevent genocide, and it details chronic persecution of the Rohingya people.
One thing I quickly wanted to ask is, we said that this was initially launched in 2019.
Yes.
It's now 2026.
Mm-hmm.
That is nearly 7 years it's taken for this to get to trial.
Mm-hmm.
Why has it taken so long? I imagine it has something to do with the fact that international law is just so complex.
100%. And the shortest explanation that I can give you is that there are several considerations in the process before the ICJ can turn its full attention towards the allegation. And nothing seems to move particularly quickly in the World Court. So we're talking about a bench of more than a dozen judges from all around the world, and they must come to a majority decision. They basically start from square one in terms of their legal reasoning for each decision, so they're not obliged to rely on a precedent. But also in this case specifically, there were disruptions in 2021 when Myanmar's government was overthrown in a military coup, as we talked about before. And we've also had the pandemic in that time. So you also need to remember that the court is considering an allegation of the world's most serious crime of genocide, which makes the process even longer.
Okay, so Myanmar is facing this allegation of genocide. How have they responded to that allegation? Have they denied it?
Well, we're yet to hear their response in the trial, but in a report submitted to the ICJ in November, Myanmar representatives said that a 2025 UN report on its human rights situation, quote, deliberately excludes and fails to recognise Myanmar's efforts towards repatriation and the actual situation on the ground. They said that they, quote, reject the baseless and one-sided quotes by the UN officials.
Right, so they are effectively rejecting these allegations.
Yeah, so in the past, they've rejected these allegations, but we are yet to hear them on trial, so we'll have to wait and see what they officially say in the court.
Okay, and so when do we find out the outcome of this case?
So the trial runs until the end of this month, and the judgment could take a further couple of months after that. So I think we're going to need to watch this space for a little bit. But I also think that it's worth mentioning that there is a separate case before the International Criminal Court, which is the UN court that tries individuals.
So just to clarify that, so the ICJ, which is what we've been talking about today, that tries countries and states, but then the International Criminal Court is the one that tries individuals.
100%, you nailed it, yes.
Got it.
And that one is investigating the current acting president of Myanmar on charges of crimes against humanity over those same 2017 attacks against the Rohingya.
Okay, so that's dealing with allegations of a similar nature, but it's looking at trying an individual rather than a country. Putting that aside, before you mentioned that the result of the trial might have implications for other cases, and I just quickly want to come back to that before we wrap up. We do have this upcoming trial put forward by South Africa against Israel. How could this decision with Myanmar affect that case?
So it's a little bit confusing because the ICJ doesn't use precedent in its cases like common law does. This just means that previous court decisions that would ordinarily inform the judgment of a case are not necessarily mandatory to address. However, Legal experts have analysed the ICJ's decision-making process and found that it does often refer to its previous decisions to support new ones. As for that case against Israel, the outcome of the Myanmar trial could inform how that case proceeds and what the judgment looks like. The next step in that case is for Israel to respond to the ICJ, and the deadline for that is March 12th. So we'll be looking out with eager eyes for both of these trials.
Yeah. All right, Em, there has been so much to unpack in this case and its potential implications. Em, thank you for unpacking all of that. It's very complex.
It certainly is a landmark case, so thank you, Billi.
And thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. We will be back this afternoon with your evening headlines, but until then, we hope you have a lovely day.